I'm really excited to introduce our presenter, actually our keynote presenter today. It's really exciting for me because 6 years ago I was involved in a leadership program, and this young lady was a high school senior at the time at St. George's, and came to speak to about 150 adults and speak, on kind of her passions and her experiences. And I remember coming home that night and talking to my wife and just telling her what a phenomenal young woman that I had heard speak earlier that day. I was so overwhelmed with her presence, her experience, her passion. And as fate would have it, we connected with her through her father-in-law, who I knew coincidentally. And Deb and I connected with this young lady. And we're excited today to share with you her look into life and her perspective. And I'm going to read a little bit about her. It's Elisabeth DeLeo is her maiden name, if you know that last name here in Spokane. But her married name is Heftel, so it's Elisabeth Heftel. She grew up in Spokane and attended both public and private schools, graduating valedictorian from St. George's in 2007. She was the co-founder and student CEO of Spokane's first robotics team, where she also coached several junior First Lego League teams. Elisabeth was named the Spokane Scholar, National Merit Finalist, Presidential Scholar semifinalist, a member of the Cum Laude Society, and was a Bosch and Lohm Honorary Science Award recipient. Elisabeth earned a degree in mathematics with a focus in philosophy. Mike Campbell, our math philosopher back in contribute to that, from the University of Washington. Throughout college, she volunteered teaching in public and private schools K through 12. She also taught classes in preparing for the SAT, ACT, and GRE. Elisabeth currently works in software development as a program manager at Microsoft. One day, she hopes to leave the high-tech industry and step into the classroom as a secondary math teacher. Exciting news, she and her husband Brandon are expecting their very first child on Thanksgiving Day. Baby H. So, one more little thing. I'm going to talk, that's the background, and how impressive is that? I'm going to talk. Commitment, dedication, certainly on her young life. But I'm going to talk today, her presentation is titled Instigate. And here's what the content will be. How can we ensure that formal education in all of its structured glory does not accidentally teach our children that their creative pursuits must also be formal and structured? Together we will explore student innovation and learn from the child entrepreneurs who took initiative and trusted their own ideas. How do we as adults provide inspiration and a network of support for young creators? What can kids and teenagers do to take initiatives in meaningful ways and pursue passionate ideas? Together, we will learn how to become instigators of powerful, positive action on a personal, local, or even global scale. So without further ado, Elisabeth Heftel.
Thank you, Chris, for that wonderful introduction. I'm very excited to be here just to participate in the conference today, let alone to have the opportunity to speak with all of you. And so I think I'll just go ahead and get started. I was going to introduce myself, but I think that Chris did that wonderfully. So I'd like to talk first about something that I feel I've kind of noticed in classroom culture. And I'm not Dr. Elisabeth Heftel, and I'm not a teacher, so I don't want to pretend to be an expert on these things. But I think something that I've noticed in classroom culture, as both a student and then in the past few years as a volunteer and as a participant in different classrooms, something that I've noticed are these three kind of elements of the culture of the classroom. And I'm not making a bold statement about whether or not these are valuable in the classroom or whether or not they can be damaging in the classroom. They are just things that I think we see in classroom culture. And the first of those is this concept of ordered progression. That there's some requirement for students to move through and establish a pattern in their education. I know at my high school you had to take freshman physics before you could take sophomore chemistry, right? And so in the culture of education, the culture of the classroom, there's an ordered progression to the way that students learn. Another thing that I've observed is this concept of structured time. That students' schedules are componentized for them, right? Students spend a very set amount of days of the year in the classroom, a set amount of hours each day in their classroom. In elementary school, they have 15 minutes of reading and then recess and then art. that if you as a student want to do something that breaks the pattern or disrupts the regular segmented time schedule, that you need to seek permission from a teacher or from administration to do that. If you want to take a course out of sequence, or if you want to leave and go to the bathroom, that you seek permission in order to do that. And the concern that I have is that students spend so much of their lives, so much time each day in the classroom where order, progression, structured time, and permission are just part of the culture. What if they are accidentally sort of taking this mindset and this model and then applying it to things that they do outside of the classroom? That when they have a creative pursuit that they'd like to experiment with, when they have something they'd like to do in their free time at home, on the weekend, over the summer, in the future, by themselves, with their family, with their peers, with their teacher, that they also kind of automatically assume and believe that there's a very structured order of progression they have to follow, time has to be set up in a certain way, and they have to seek a lot of permission along the way. And that is something I think that has the potential to be able to actually restrict innovation that we could be seeing from young people. Does anyone happen to know what this is, just based on the acronym? Is anyone familiar with this? Oh, that's awesome, if you're not. This is the Draw a Scientist task, which is exactly what it sounds like. So the reason that each of you hopefully has a pencil and paper that hopefully you got on your way in is because I'm going to ask you right now to draw a scientist. Okay. So just take 1 minute or so, hold up the little desk on the side of your seat, and just real quick, sketch a scientist. So go ahead and keep drawing if you'd like. This is an experiment, basically, that's been done since the 1950s. With all sorts of different demographics. It's done in elementary school classrooms, it's done in city parks, just asking adults who are walking by to stop for a moment and draw scientists. And it turns out, very consistently, that for the majority of populations, when you ask people to draw a scientist, they draw something that looks like this. They draw a Caucasian man, usually either bald or with crazy hair, right? Often wearing glasses, which is this guy isn't, but wearing a white lab coat, with something that indicates a laboratory, something like a microscope or some kind of lab setup, and test tubes or beakers or petri dishes, chemistry, basically. They draw an older white man in a white lab coat doing chemistry. And it gets even better when you ask the same people to then stop and now right away draw a second scientist, right? They've just drawn this guy, who some of you might have also drawn, and that's fine, right? And then you ask people to draw a second scientist, and they tend to draw danger. They tend to draw caution signs and biohazards and villains, basically, like evil mad scientists. My favorite is one kid, this is the kid I read about, not a kid that I work with, who drew his first scientist, who drew the typical scientist that you see up there, and then along with his peers was asked to draw a second scientist. And he drew a guy in a white lab coat with crazy hair, holding a test tube over his head with a little word bubble that says, "With this I destroy the world." Right? So this is this image that we have of science, and I think that's really fascinating. And what's most interesting to me is that actually, when you ask very young children under 2nd grade, to draw a scientist, they don't draw this guy. They actually draw themselves doing science. And I think when most of us think about science, right, maybe kind of our gut reaction is to draw that guy from the other side, but if we stop and think about it, maybe we ourselves hold a science degree, or we know someone who holds a science degree, and maybe they wear a white lab coat and work in the lab and happen to be an older white man with crazy hair, right? But oftentimes scientists look like any of us and work, with studying nutrition or transportation or humans, whatever it could be. So before we go on and chat a little bit about what I think about this, I want you to just kind of turn to the people around you for just 30 seconds or so and share your thoughts. Did all of you actually draw a non-stereotypical scientist? That would be cool. Do you think that you do see the stereotype? And there were two statements from this article that really spoke to me because they really called out what I think is so interesting here. And the first was this, right? What child would aspire to possessing a white coat, a glum demeanor, glasses, and too much facial hair when there are pop singers, sports stars, and artists to emulate? Isn't that fantastic to read that and think about that? Now, I hope that this doesn't sound like I'm suggesting that there's anything wrong with aspiring to be a pop singer, sports star, or artist. Absolutely not. But there's clearly something more interesting when you see a pop singer, a sports star, or an artist, for a child, right, or a teenager or an adult, than when you see this man in his white lab coat with glasses in a lab, all alone, not smiling, right? And the second quote that I loved so much from this article says, "The pursuit of discovery provokes passionate, anarchic behavior from people desperate to be first to a breakthrough, and makes science more rock and roll than the Rolling Stones." And I love that. That got at exactly the heart of what I wanted to talk about today. I thought about that for a while, this idea of passionate, anarchic behavior and science being very rock and roll. Aren't those exactly the things that we sometimes see in pop singers, sports stars, and artists that we're drawn to, that for whatever reason we want to emulate? I really believe that what this is getting at is kind of this idea of rebellion, that people tend to want to rebel in some way as a child or a teenager or an adult, that you want to kind of push the envelope and do something that's very against the system and surprise people and not meet people's expectations and kind of break the mold somehow. And I think that that three things can tend to happen, just in my observation, with that desire, with that streak of rebellion. Either you can get into trouble, right? That can lead you to something that's harmful to yourself or to others. It's not something we love to see. Or you can kind of squash it down, right? You can see that drive, that desire for something passionate and anarchic as something that's negative and that you should just kind of bottle up and put away and say, no, I should stick to what's safe, I should follow the pattern. I've seen that that can have bad results. And I don't really think that that's the best option either. The third thing that I think can happen is that you can take that rebellious streak and it can actually be harnessed for good, right? That can be used to fuel a passion for something that is hugely beneficial to society. When I think about most of the work that most scientists do, I see work that has the potential to really improve my life, despite the fact that it's passionate and anarchic. Often we see that word rebellion, or that idea of rebelliousness, and we think about that as something that's strictly negative. And that's sort of why I chose the title for this talk, Instigate, because we think about that as something that's bad, something that's negative. And when I look at these definitions of the word instigate, this is exactly what I want students to do, and adults, right? This is what I want to see in our communities. I want to see people provoking action, or causing something to come about. I want to see people starting things. I especially like number 8, to bring something volatile or intense into being. When I think about the kinds of innovation that have most improved my life or most dramatically changed my life, I think about things that at their very inceptions were pretty intense or volatile, very different, upset the system. I'd like to introduce you to a few young people who really inspire me. This is Leanna, she's 16. She is the founder and owner of Leanna's Inc., which is a line of organic hair care products. When she was 11, she decided to go into business. People were complimenting her on her hair, and she knew that it was because of her homemade hair care products. And I love this. Leanna said, I had nothing to lose because I figured that if it didn't work out, I still had my whole life ahead. This is Robert. Robert is 15 now. He's the owner of Nay Games and the creator of the iPhone app Bubble Ball, which knocked Angry Birds out of its #1 spot as most downloaded free game in the Apple App Store. His friend suggested that he make an iPhone app. He thought it sounded cool. He didn't have any previous coding experience, so Robert went to the public library and learned how to build a game. This is Mark, who's 19 now. He's a successful serial technology entrepreneur. He's sold 3 web companies. He has several more that he still owns. He's also started 2 nonprofits. And Mark said, I've always been interested in technology and how it can make a difference. Entrepreneurial action creates change. This is Lizzie, who's 12. She's the owner of Lizzie Marie Cuisine. When she was 6 years old, she desperately wanted to take horseback riding lessons and offered to help pay for them. And her parents asked how she would do that. And she said, also healthy homemade baked goods at the local farmers market. Within a couple of years, word of her passion and her original recipes had spread, and she she's appeared alongside celebrity chefs at large events. She's been a guest on the Rachel Ray Show. She's a spokesperson for the American Heart Association's Go Red for Women campaign. And last year, she signed a branded entertainment TV show. She's well. This is Farhad, who's 18. He is the creator of Rockstar Media, which is an international award-winning agency with 42 employees, focused on branding, marketing, and web development. And Farhad started as an entrepreneur when he was 13 years old with $10 from his parents. This is Asia, who's 15. She's the owner of Stinky Feet Girls, which is a 1940s-inspired clothing line. And her company donates a portion of every shirt that they sell to She's Worth It, which is a nonprofit organization that Asia started that's dedicated to ending human trafficking. Buy a shirt, save a child is their motto. They're expected to make about $20,000 a month this year. Here's Brian, who's 21. He's the creator of Hip, which is a mobile gaming rewards program. And within 1 year of his idea to create this program, he had raised over $4 million in venture capital to get started. This is Adam, who's 20. When he was 15, he decided that he was going to start a company and make over $1 million by the time he was 21. He went on to start about 30 or so unsuccessful, self-funded web ventures, and eventually had a couple that were successful enough to earn him over $1 million by his 18th birthday. I'm very inspired by these young people, and I think that their success highlights something that is changing rapidly in education right now. Tony Wagner is kind of one of my big heroes in education at the moment, and he actually spoke at Microsoft in April, and I was so excited because I already had plans for this talk, and I couldn't wait to go hear him speak, and this quote, more than anything, leapt out at me. He said, "Knowledge today is ubiquitous, constantly changing, growing exponentially. Knowledge today is free. It's like air, like water. It's become a commodity. There's no competitive advantage today in knowing more than the person next to you. The world doesn't care what you know. What the world cares about is what you can do with what you know." I love this because I think that it is both so obvious and so revolutionary, so different. And this really is new, right? I think that there really was a time not that long ago when having a large knowledge base was the thing that set you apart or made you special and enabled you to succeed. And that's changing because right now we all have Wikipedia in our pockets, right? If any of us has a question, if we want to gain more knowledge about something, if we want to become an expert in something, we have a lot of access to all of that. Knowledge is like water. And the thing that sets us apart, that gives us the ability to succeed, is what we do with what we know. Like each of those 8 young entrepreneurs we just looked at. Now, kind of the interesting, almost collision here is the fact that we still teach a lot of knowledge. And I'm not saying that that's the wrong thing entirely, right? I was always taught that knowledge is power, and I think that there's still a truth to that statement. But if you think about a math quiz or a U.S. history test, primarily we test students on their ability to recall facts and figures. Now, I know, and probably those of you who are also out of school can know this too, I know that there are a lot of things, a lot of facts and figures that I learned in the classroom that I don't remember and haven't really used. And those of you who are still students, you can probably already predict that there are things that you're doing in some of your classes that you think, well, when am I ever going to use this fact? Now, I think I also learned a lot of other things, along with those facts and figures as I prepared for that math quiz, things like that. So it's still good to acquire knowledge. There's something that comes along with that. But will the acquisition of knowledge, specifically that ability to kind of recall facts and figures, will that ultimately prepare children to be successful in college and beyond? And I think we know that that's not entirely complete. That's not the full answer. And the way that the world is changing, it's becoming less and less important to have that knowledge base and more important to know how to innovate and do something new with what you know. So there's these 5 areas that I kind of want to focus on briefly. Areas where we as adults can innovate in our classrooms, in our family life, in different things we do in the community to take ordinary situations and turn them into opportunities for children, students to learn how to innovate and to kind of flex their innovation muscles. So often, I feel like when having conversations about education reform, the answer seems to be to do like a complete overhaul of the system. And that's kind of demoralizing, at least to me, to hear, because it's probably not going to happen for a little while. And so my hope is that in this conversation we can think about things that we can do differently in our own lives today without changing the system that dramatically. So the first thing I want to talk about is the individual nature of education. If you think about the way that a student, any grade, is assessed over the course of one full school year, the majority of what makes up their grade at the end of the year is the work that they've done as an individual, right? How they've done on their individual assignments and individual assessments. And there's a reason for that, certainly. But if you think about the way that most innovation comes about, it's very rarely the work of an individual. It's almost always the work of a team. That when we can leverage each other's strengths to compensate for our weaknesses and vice versa, and when we can build off of each other's ideas, we end up having much better creativity at the end of the day. And so one thing that we can do to establish an environment where innovation can flourish is to take in some of our opportunities for individual learning and turn them into opportunities for teamwork. Another area that we can improve upon like this is specialization, right? And by this I mean kind of the segmentation of subject matter. That when I was in high school, for example, I had a calculus class in the morning and an English class in the afternoon. Never in my calculus class did we talk about how to write. And never in my English class did we talk about math. Well, because of what I happened to study in college, when I got to college, I did a lot of writing about math. That's basically all that I did in my major. And it was there where I had to think about English and math together and how they overlap and how they intersect, that I was able to really do my most creative thinking and my most creative work in either of those spaces. And so I think that we can take the conversation that's normally very segmented by subject matter and turn it into something that's much more cross-disciplinary. Something that I see in a lot of classrooms that I've always seen, that I always saw as a student, was risk aversion. I think we've probably all seen that situation where the teacher asks a question that everyone knows the answer to and no one raises their hand. It's like, all of you know, but no one raises their hand. And I think that happens for many reasons. One reason could be that previously in each of those students' history, they've had an opportunity to raise their hand and they've done it and they've gotten the wrong answer and it felt like a failure. They're not going to do it again. This actually is a perfect example of another place where we see risk aversion in the classroom when an open-ended assignment is given. I was trying to think of a concrete example for this, and then my husband, again, had just read something great in the news that was perfect. So a few years ago in a classroom in the UK, it was a computer and technology classroom, and the teacher gave an open-ended assignment asking students to create a multimedia project. And every single student in that classroom, except for one, made a PowerPoint presentation. They'd made PowerPoints before, they knew how it was going to be graded, right? It was safe. One student, from scratch, made an iPhone app. Learned how to program and created an iPhone app and installed it on his teacher's phone. That kid got an F because the teacher didn't know how to grade it. He'd never made an app before. He played it, he had some other teachers play it, but he was hoping that everybody would do a PowerPoint because he knew how to grade it. Now, I think that most of us, if we saw a kid make an iPhone app when everyone else made a PowerPoint, we'd be like, awesome, you get an A, that's really cool. I mean, maybe not that easily, right? We'd want to look at it and study it, but I think that we'd be impressed with that student's innovation. But sometimes I think that students do have the mindset of every other student in that classroom because maybe they've seen one case like this before, and they've learned not to take the risk. Well, naturally, when you're actually innovating, you need to fail a whole bunch before you're going to be successful. And so we can change the culture and create an environment where failure is okay. We can even ensure that kids fail early and often and teach them to fail quickly and model that that's all right. A fourth thing to discuss real quick is kind of the consumption-based model of education. I saw this so much in college. I had a lot of college classes where I went and sat down and the teacher dispensed information to me, and I tried to absorb it. Either sometimes because I cared, and sometimes because I was trying to predict what would be on the test. But either way, that was a passive activity on my part. I was consuming. And naturally, when the student is being passive and just consuming, they're not necessarily going to think of a great creative idea. But when we instead create opportunities, even while they're learning the basics, for students to create, now they're in the driver's seat. Right? And they have the opportunity to innovate if something comes their way. And last extrinsic motivation, that I'm motivated to do my schoolwork because I want to get to the end of the day or the end of the school year. I want to get a good grade because my parents will be proud. There's a reward system set up by my teacher or my family. I want to go to a good college. It's all things that are external to me. And great innovation is almost always the result of intrinsic motivation. And so how can we as adults, I mean, it kind of seems like there's nothing we could do because we are external. But we can create opportunities for play, where passion can kind of begin and ignite and mature and develop into a sense of purpose. And when we observe those areas of passion for students, we can harness that intrinsic motivation and tie it in with work that we're trying to do in our family, in our classroom, and in our community. One personal example that I can share that I think really illustrates actually all of these 5 areas is something from my past. When I was a sophomore in high school, a group of friends and I decided to start a first robotics team. This is an international robotics competition where high school teams have 6 weeks to design and build a robot and go compete or play in a game with other robots across the country and across the world. And so a group of us, underclassmen, there were 11 of us, were like, yeah, that's cool, let's build a robot. And we didn't really know what we were talking about. And we found one adult who was like, yeah, let's do it. Just jumped on board and believed in us. And after 6 weeks of learning how to build a robot and then designing this particular robot and building it, we were able to go off to competitions, and we actually won our first competition in the Pacific Northwest Regional. We got to go to the World Championships in Atlanta. And that experience was victorious for 2 reasons. I mean, it was certainly a victory to win and to continue to compete, but it was also really successful and victorious for me personally because it ignited this passion in me. A passion for science and technology, and especially a passion for speaking about it and engaging with others about it. So what went so right with this particular project? It absolutely required teamwork. It was very cross-disciplinary. Obviously, there's all sorts of types of science and math that are involved in building a robot, but also we had to write essays as a portion of this competition. We had to raise money so that we could travel. There was a lot of failure. If you have 11 teenagers who are building a robot from scratch for the very first time, right? We had to design different designs, make prototypes, etc., until we found something that worked. It was all creativity. We weren't given instructions. This was really the creation of this team, kind of working off of each other's ideas. And this was all intrinsically motivated. Nobody had given us this assignment, but we had just decided that this would be cool for whatever reason. And it really started as a form of play. We were playing together and just having a lot of fun. And for me personally, it sparked a passion that over time matured into something more specific and gave me a sense of purpose that really carried me through high school and the ways I got involved in all sorts of other things and through college and today. So I'd like to speak about kind of what skills we hope to learn from creating the right environment. What are things that kids and teenagers can be trying to do, and how can we emulate those skills? Christensen and Dyer are 3 researchers who've written a couple of books together. One is called The Innovator's DNA, and they studied different innovators like Steve Jobs and found 5 specific skills, learned skills, that each of these innovators had. And when they then looked at kind of the rest of us, at pretty ordinary people who started to adopt these skills, they saw that real innovation resulted, that communities were changed as a result. The first of these is the ability to question, right? Innovators question. They challenge the status quo, they question authority even, they look at things around them and wonder if there's a better way to do things. Innovators also observe. They pick up on the small details of the world around us, the things that the rest of us take for granted or overlook, and wonder if there are any alternatives for some of those details. They network. And this isn't network in the sense of get to know people so you meet your future boss, so one day you can kind of stay in touch and get a new position. Obviously that serves a different purpose. Innovators network to build a broader perspective, to talk to a very diverse audience, and learn different ways of looking at the world and surprising perspectives that they can use to broaden their own perspective. Innovators experiment, right? They actually try those ideas that they've had that come as a result of questioning and observing. They put them into practice and see what works. They take things apart. And perhaps my favorite one is to associate. This harkens back to the cross-disciplinary conversation that we were just having. That innovators take seemingly unrelated problem spaces and overlap them and try to find the intersections and find kind of where they fit together to come up with solutions that are very unique and that solve multiple problems at once. I'll introduce you to one more young hero who exemplifies some of these things before we start to wrap up. This is Victoria. She is 12 years old. She is the youth leader of the National Action Network, which is a civil rights group led by the Reverend Al Sharpton. Victoria wants to change the voting age to 14. She wants to teach kids to save money and invest, and she wants to create more after-school programs to get teenage boys off the streets in her neighborhood of Harlem. Victoria is concerned about childhood obesity. She has a black belt in karate and wants to make sure that every kid in this country goes to PE every day. Victoria wants to partner with young people, with senior citizens, to teach the older generation how to use social media. She leads marches and addresses crowds of thousands. She writes online about problems that kids face, like bullying. She's appeared on Sesame Street and Saturday Night Live, and she has a weekly radio segment where she talks about what it's like to be a kid in New York City. Victoria says that she has so much to talk about because of what she observes every day in the world around her. She sees problems in her neighborhood that she wants to address. Recently, she was compared to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and she blushed and said, "He was the first of many things, and I'm going to make sure that he is not the last." Why is she able to do these things? Why is she able to take action on the things that she believes in when she's only 12? I think there's lots and lots of reasons for that, and one of them has to be that she has adults around her who believe in her ability to do these things. Hear that she has a stance, that she has an opinion, that she has things she wants to do, and then adults are creating opportunities, connecting her with opportunities to be active in her community. This isn't a young girl who sees a role model like Dr. King and thinks, "That's what I want to be like someday." She's thinking, "Well, that's what I want to be like today." And there are adults who are moving things around to let that happen for her. And then she can stand on her own and do the things that she believes in. Just to end, these are 8 suggestions from those 8 young child entrepreneurs that we saw earlier. They've given advice to other young people who want to do something new or start something on their own. I won't read all of these for you, but I've bolded some of the things that particularly stood out to me. I'm happy to make all these slides available also if anyone wants to have a copy of some of these quotes for their own. I am very grateful to be in a space where we can be brainstorming and thinking about how to create opportunities to create new innovations, things that can improve our personal lives, our families, our neighborhoods, our country, our world. And I really think that that's ultimately kind of the power that is in each of us, and specifically in gifted children and gifted adults. This opportunity to take all of these resources that we have and attach them with resources that other people have and come up with something brand new and actually act on that and be creative and kind of break free of some of the formality and structure that is in so much of the rest of our lives. I'm very glad that I've been able to be here today to speak with you. I'll be doing a couple of workshops and hang out for the rest of the day. Hopefully I'll get to connect with each of you individually. But thank you so much for having me here and listening to me this morning, and I hope that you have a wonderful